Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a short video on the strange travails of German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, or Schmerz, or Misery, um, and he seems to be leading Germany down a disastrous path. Um, we were commenting many times on the abysmal nature of his predecessor, Chancellor Olaf Scholz. But in comparison with Merz, Scholz is increasingly coming across as a statesman. Merz seems determined to escalate the war in Ukraine. In that sense, he's not any different from other leaders in Europe, not all that different from Macron and Keir Starmer. However, he seems very keen on escalating specifically Germany's involvement. Which is very, very problematic for obvious reasons, because naturally Russians and other Europeans are very sensitive to any German military involvement in Ukraine, and particularly German military attacks on Russia. And this is of a piece with Merz's reckless talk about maybe reintroducing conscription to Germany, making Germany the dominant power in Europe, building up a European army, massive European army, building up a massive German army, and massively increasing German military expenditures. These are all things that Schmerz has propounded. Moreover, he, during the campaign, and even before, had promised to deliver for Ukraine the Taurus missile. Now, this is a long-range missile. Its range is around 500 kilometers. It's a longer range than the range of the Storm Shadow missiles of the British, and the Scalp of the French. It's a longer range than the American ATACMS missiles, and clearly, if you use the Taurus missiles, fire them from the territory of Ukraine, you can reach Moscow. So that's a serious business, and it's particularly serious. And as we learned in that intercepted telephone conversation involving German officers, that there is no way that Ukraine can use the Taurus missiles without German experts and German trainers and German technicians on hand. Ukrainians cannot do it. And just as we discussed before, using drones, using missiles, Ukraine cannot target targets in Russia without the satellite technology provided by the United States, provided by NATO. It's a very elaborate, difficult undertaking, selecting the target, finding the target, and evading all of the anti-drone weaponry, evading all the anti-missile weaponry, and evading all the anti-aircraft missiles. That requires a lot of sophisticated expertise that Ukraine simply doesn't have. So Germany would have to essentially launch these missiles on Ukraine's behalf. So that's a very problematic, because that would mean Germany would be launching missiles that could potentially reach Moscow. And yet, Chancellor Schmerz seemed not to be terribly troubled by this. And so, what happened a few days ago was that Schmerz announced that there would now no longer be any restrictions on Ukraine's use of weaponry provided by Germany. He said that, oh, that's the same as, no restrictions on, what the French provide, what the British provide, what the Americans provide, and or any issues about the distance, and that this is, there's a certain limit to the distance that they can just use. All that is gone. Ukraine can do what it likes with the weapons. Now, of course, that raised a interesting question. Did Merz or Schmerz mean the Taurus missiles? Because after all, he said he was going to deliver the Taurus missiles. Does that mean that there are to be no restrictions on Ukraine's use of the Taurus missiles? And initially, it did seem as if that's what Schmerz was indeed saying. So let's take a look first at what he actually said. So here is a story from Politico. It says Merz lifts range limits on Ukraine weapons to hit targets inside Russia. Germany is under pressure to supply Ukraine with its powerful long-range Taurus cruise missiles. So remember, Merz hadn't actually said that this thing that he does, I mean, he's always shooting his mouth off. Unlike Sergeant Schultz, who was kind of taciturn, didn't really say all that much, Merz is very voluble, very garrulous, and talks when he should keep his mouth shut. And here then he says, Germany and its key allies have lifted range restrictions on weapons sent to Ukraine, allowing Kiev to hit targets inside Russia with no external limits, Chancellor Friedrich Merz said on Monday. Okay, so he says, lifted range restrictions, don't worry about the range restrictions. And then the announcement by the German leader could clear the path for Berlin to finally deliver its powerful Taurus cruise missiles to Kiev. Now, of course, this is Politico. So they're one of the most bloodthirsty, belligerent publications anywhere in the Western world. So, we can finally deliver the powerful Taurus cruise missiles, something that the previous government refused to do so as not to provoke nuclear-armed Russia. And so here Merz is now speaking. He says, there are no more range limitations for weapons delivered to Ukraine, neither from the Brits, nor the French, nor from us, not from the Americans either, Merz said at the WDR Europa Forum in Berlin on Monday. He added that Ukraine must be allowed to strike back by attacking military infrastructure on Russian territory. Now, there's a problem here, obviously, which is that Biden lifted the restrictions on the ATACMS during the latter part of his administration. This is already after the election, when he seemed to be determined to create as many problems as possible for the incoming Trump administration. However, and while there were attacks deep inside Russian territory, using the ATACMS and also with the Storm Shadows and the Scalp missiles, there haven't been too many since Trump returned to power. So it seems as if Trump put a stop to these provocative, reckless acts. And indeed, he said at some point before entering the Oval Office that he thought it was absolutely idiotic for Biden to have signed off on the use of ATACMS on Russian territory. So he says, oh, there are no more range limitations for weapons delivered to Ukraine, neither from the Brits, nor the French, nor from us, not from the Americans either, even though that's not the view of the Trump administration. That's not that, that may be what Biden said. Trump has not said that. Merz is shooting his mouth off. And then we have the Financial Times, which says Germany's Merz backs Ukraine's long-range missile strikes on Russia. Chancellor says Berlin has joined the US, UK, and France in lifting range restrictions on weapons supplied to Kiev. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has backed Ukrainian military strikes deep into Russian territory following his earlier commitment to supply Kiev with German long-range missiles. So, I mean, notice that there's a lot of confusion here because Merz hadn't actually said, well, I'm sending the Taurus missiles and this lifting of restrictions on targets inside Russia applies to the use of the Taurus missiles. He hasn't said any of that. He's been shooting his mouth off and is allowing the media to interpret his comments as if he's now basically saying Ukraine can fire off the Taurus missiles wherever they want. Moscow, sure, why not? Yeah, but it needs German help to fire them. Yeah, we'll provide it. Germany, Britain, France, and the US have removed all range restrictions for weapons delivered to Ukraine, Merz said on Monday. And then Paris, London, and Washington have supplied long-range missiles to Kiev and have already allowed strikes in Russian territory. But Merz's stance contrasts with that of his Social Democrat predecessor, Olaf Scholz. And then he goes on, the former chancellor repeatedly rejected pleas from Kiev and its allies to supply the Ukrainian armed forces with German Taurus missiles, which have an intelligent warhead system that can inflict huge damage to structures such as bridges and bunkers. And then while Merz has decided to stop disclosing weapons deliveries since taking office, a stance in line with strategic ambiguity approach of President Macron, he had previously said he favored deliveries of Taurus missiles to Kiev if they were coordinated with European allies. And then there is no longer any range restriction on weapons delivered to Ukraine, and then so on. This means that Ukraine can now defend itself, for example, by attacking military positions in Russia. It couldn't do that until some time ago. It did do that with very few exceptions. Ukraine can do that now. In jargon, we call this long-range fire. Now, all of this is very confusing because by not spelling out that he's delivering the Taurus missiles and that this lifting of restrictions applies to the Taurus missiles, Merz may not be saying anything at all. I mean, just saying, well, there are no restrictions. Well, we kind of knew that there were no real restrictions on missiles that have a short range, which is what Germany had provided to Ukraine up until now, that they have a short range. So, it leaves you scratching your head. What is Merz talking about? And then here's just this very point has obviously aroused a lot of questions inside Germany. What the hell is Merz talking about? And here's Politico saying Germany's Merz under fire over contradictory remarks on long-range weapons for Ukraine. And so German Chancellor Friedrich Merz wanted to use Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's visit to Berlin on Wednesday, and Zelensky is indeed in Germany. Long trip, the one of these 3-day long trip. They're going to Aachen tomorrow, where Ursula von der Leyen will be collecting a prize. Ursula von der Leyen is one of these people who's always collecting a prize somewhere. I'm not quite sure what her accomplishments are, what distinguished services to humanity she has undertaken, but she's always collecting a prize. Anyway, so she's going to, Merz, Zelensky will go to Aachen for this prize-giving ceremony for Ursula von der Leyen. So it's all girls together. So it said, instead, the Chancellor is under fire from within his own ranks over unclear statements he made this week on whether Germany is prepared to provide Ukraine with long-range Taurus missiles that could strike deep into Russian territory. The previous left-leaning government rejected making that move so as not to provoke nuclear-armed Moscow. Then it says, ahead of Zelensky's visit, Roderick Kiesewetter, a senior conservative parliamentarian belonging to Merz's center-right Christian Democratic Union, sharply criticized the Chancellor for making contradictory statements on the matter. There is no sign of Germany finally delivering Taurus cruise missiles, because I still see no unity in the coalition and no political will to respond appropriately and with strength and consistency to Russia's massive escalation. So the nutters in the German CDU, who seem to have gone back to their kind of early days of the Cold War, when there was, basically a lot of former Nazis were there and were still thinking that, the Cold War could become a hot war and, Germany would be able to, take some territory, recoup some of its losses, as long as, the Americans are in Germany's corner. That was the sort of the CDU of the 1950s. But the CDU changed, but they've gone back to their old ways and says, we have to respond appropriately and with strength and consistency to Russia's massive escalation. And Kiesewetter is just not happy that that Merz is dragging his feet. So it goes on, such statements are therefore not helpful overall because they highlight Europe's weakness to Russia. And then it goes on, following Merz's initial comments Monday, his finance minister, Social Democratic Party leader Lars Klingbeil, denied there had been a change in policy. This is quite striking because this is the number two, this Lars Klingbeil, he's a social democrat. He denied there's been a change in policy, opening up the possibility of a rift on the issue between the coalition partners. There is no new agreement that goes beyond what the previous government had in place. So Klingbeil is saying, yeah, I mean, there were no restrictions, but, the range of the weaponry that Sergeant Schultz had provided was limited. So it doesn't really matter that they said no restrictions on the range because they didn't really have very long range. So it says nothing has changed because ultimately there has clearly been no decision as yet made on whether to provide Ukraine with the Taurus missile. And then here the Guardian, reports about what happened at this meeting today between Chancellor Merz and Zelensky. So it says Germany and Ukraine reach deal for long-range weapons production. So not anything on Taurus, long-range weapons production. Okay, so where are these weapons going to be produced? And how long is the long range? Berlin agrees to help finance construction in Ukraine of weapons that can strike targets inside Russia. Ukraine and Germany have agreed to future military cooperation in which Berlin will help finance long-range weapons production on Ukrainian soil. Okay, so it looks like Germany is going to help Ukraine build arms factories on the territory of Ukraine, and what about the Taurus? Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, said the weapons would be produced in a Kiev-Berlin collaboration. Our defense ministers will sign a memorandum of understanding today regarding the procurement of Ukrainian-manufactured long-range weapon systems. There will be no range restrictions allowing Ukraine to fully defend itself, even against military targets outside its own territory. So he repeats this formulaic statement, but since we don't know anything about the range, then what was the point of his shooting his mouth off like this? He says neither leader would detail the specific weapons that would be manufactured in Ukraine, saying it was prudent to keep the information as secretive as possible. Zelensky said he expected the first weapons to be ready by June 2026. So that's a year's time. The expectation is that Berlin will supply Ukraine with the technical components to build and maintain its own long-range weaponry, including rockets and cruise missiles with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. So they have this expectation. We don't know whether that's the expectation or not. One should say that 2,500 kilometers is about the range of the Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles, and as well as the ATACMS. I mean, the Taurus missiles had a range much well, I don't know, 25. Sorry, I don't know if that's good. The 2,500 kilometers. No, that's a serious one. No, because if that's the case, then that is a very serious weaponry, because the Taurus missile had a range of 500 kilometers, and the Storm Shadow, Scalp, ATACMS was something more like 250, 300 kilometers. So 2,500 kilometers, that would definitely be a very serious weaponry. And definitely could target Moscow. So if there are no restrictions on those, then that is indeed quite a serious escalation. This could enable Kiev to better defend itself and also save Berlin from accusations at home, in particular, that it is a warmonger. No, it will not save Berlin from accusation that at home that it is a warmonger, because Ukraine cannot do the targeting. It doesn't have the satellite technology to be able to do the targeting. Helping to placate skeptics within the elements of Merz's government who feared Germany being dragged into a wider scale conflict. This is absolute rubbish, because again, the Guardian thinks that these readers are idiots and don't know that Ukraine cannot use these missiles without the technical know-how and assistance of Germans, Americans, British, French, whoever. And then here's the BBC report, which says German Chancellor promises to help Ukraine produce long-range missiles. They are long-range. This is long-range stuff. Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz has told Ukraine's Zelensky that Berlin will help Kiev produce long-range missiles to defend itself from Russian attack. We want to talk about production, and we will not publicly discuss details, he said. And it says the Taurus has a range of 500 kilometers, just as I said, and could reach deeper into Russian territory than other far-range missiles. So if they're really talking about a 2,500 kilometer missile, then that's 5 times the range of the Taurus, and that is definitely one very serious escalation. that Germany will have affected. So if that's the plan, then, as I said at the beginning, Chancellor Schmerz could indeed become Germany's second worst chancellor. You can never be Germany's worst chancellor. That position has already been taken. So you can only vie to be Germany's second worst chancellor. So although Merz did not refer to the Taurus by name during his press conference with the Ukrainian leader, he did say a memorandum of understanding on long-range missiles would be signed by the German and Ukraine defense ministers later on Wednesday. And that's it. So what does that tell us? Obviously, there's some confusion, which Chancellor Schmerz has contributed to by declaring boldly, no more restrictions on the range of missiles, and as well as all the bold promises that he made about supplying the Taurus missile to Ukraine. Then his remarks were interpreted as Germany is going to provide the Taurus missiles, and there are to be no restrictions on their use by the Ukrainians. And now he seems to be back down and says, well, but he hasn't denied that Germany will provide the Taurus missile. He hasn't confirmed, but he hasn't denied it. But instead, they're going to build missiles in Ukraine. So Germany will help build these missiles with a range that is 5 times greater than the range of the Taurus missiles, 2,500 kilometers. So after all this confusion, what we can say is that Chancellor Schmerz is engaged in one very, very serious escalation, and it's understandable that the Russians are very upset about this and are issuing all manner of threats to Germany, and in particular to Chancellor Schmerz. And I think we'll probably discuss this at greater length in tomorrow's live stream. So thank you very much, everybody who has joined me. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.